I need you to listen to me for a few seconds before we begin. The story you're about to see today has an ending so powerful that people stay silent for minutes, trying to process what just happened. But that part, the ending, the most intense moment, YouTube only shows it to subscribers. Without subscribing, you miss the climax, the shock, the entire point. So subscribe right now, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. This experience is even better when we know who's on the other side. The fluorescent lights of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport flickered overhead as Helena clutched her son's small hand, her worn canvas bag digging into her shoulder. Before we dive into this incredible journey that will leave you breathless, let me tell you something. What you're about to read has an ending so unbelievable, so emotionally powerful, that you won't want to miss a single word. This story will take you through twists and turns you never saw coming. And if you love dramatic, heart-wrenching tales that restore your faith in unexpected love, you need to subscribe right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss the other stories we have lined up. Now, let me take you back to that fateful night when Helena's entire world was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. Helena Muller had learned long ago that life rarely handed out second chances. At 28, she looked closer to 40, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Her son, 4-year-old Theo, tugged at her sleeve, his wide brown eyes reflecting the bright terminal lights. They'd been traveling for 16 hours, catching connecting flights from their tiny apartment in rural Montana to visit her dying mother in Boston. The trip had drained what little savings she had left, and now they faced the final leg of their journey on a red-eye flight that would land them in Massachusetts at dawn. "Mama, I'm tired," Theo whimpered, his voice small and fragile, in the bustling airport. "I know, baby. Just one more flight, okay? Then we'll see Grandma." Helena's voice cracked. She hadn't told Theo that Grandma might not make it through the week. How could she explain death to someone who still believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy? As they boarded the plane, Helena noticed the stark divide between first class and economy. The curtain separating the two worlds might as well have been made of steel. She guided Theo down the narrow aisle to their seats in row 34, the very back of the aircraft, where the constant hum of the engines would make sleep nearly impossible. But sleep was a luxury Helena couldn't afford anyway. She had to stay alert, had to be strong for Theo, had to figure out how she'd manage her mother's medical bills, her rent, and the stack of overdue notices waiting for her back home. The flight attendant announced boarding would close in 5 minutes. Helena settled Theo by the window, hoping the view of the night sky might distract him from his exhaustion. She buckled him in, then collapsed into her own seat, feeling every bone in her body protest. She hadn't eaten since that morning, couldn't remember the last time she'd slept more than 4 hours straight. Single motherhood was a marathon with no finish line. And Helena had been running on empty for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to have energy. As the plane began to fill, Helena closed her eyes for just a moment. Just one moment of peace. Before the chaos of landing, the hospital, the inevitable conversations with doctors using words like terminal and palliative care. Just one moment where she didn't have to be strong. She didn't notice when the passenger in the seat beside her arrived. Didn't notice the expensive cologne that wafted through economy class like it had taken a wrong turn. Didn't notice the way several flight attendants suddenly became unusually attentive to the back of the plane. Maximilian Thorne was not accustomed to flying economy. In fact, the 35-year-old tech billionaire hadn't sat in anything less than first class since he was 21 and sold his first startup for $8 million. But tonight, circumstances had forced his hand. His private jet was undergoing emergency maintenance, and every first-class seat on every flight to Boston had been booked solid. His lawyers had been adamant: be in Boston by morning for the reading of his grandfather's will, or forfeit everything. Everything meant $6 billion, controlling interest in Thorne Industries, and the legacy that 4 generations of Thornes had built. All of it hung in the balance because of one archaic clause in his grandfather's will. The inheritance would only pass to a married man, a stable family man. The kind of man Maximilian had never been and never wanted to be. He'd spent his entire adult life avoiding commitment, building empires instead of relationships, conquering markets instead of hearts. Now, at 35, he was being punished for it. His grandfather, ever the traditionalist, had made his requirements crystal clear. No wife, no fortune. The will would be read at 8 a.m., less than 9 hours away, and Maximilian was no closer to finding a solution than he'd been when his grandfather died 3 weeks ago. He folded his 6'3" frame into the cramped economy seat, his Armani suit looking absurdly out of place among the worn upholstery and plastic tray tables. The woman next to him appeared to be asleep already, her head tilted awkwardly against the seat, her son curled up by the window. Maximilian barely glanced at them. He had bigger problems than uncomfortable seating arrangements. His phone buzzed. Another text from his lawyer, Richard. Any progress on the wife situation? Clock is ticking, Max. Maximilian clenched his jaw. The wife situation. As if marriage was something you could pick up at a convenience store, like a bottle of water or a pack of gum. He'd considered hiring an actress, but his lawyers warned him his grandfather's estate executors would investigate any recent marriage with a fine-tooth comb. They'd demand proof of a genuine relationship, evidence of cohabitation, witnesses who could testify to their authenticity as a couple. The plane began to taxi. Maximilian felt the walls closing in, not from claustrophobia, but from the weight of impossible choices. Give up everything his family had built, or somehow materialize a legitimate wife in the next 8 hours. Neither option seemed remotely feasible. Beside him, Helena stirred. The movement of the plane had jostled her awake, and for a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then reality crashed back. The red-eye flight, Boston. Her mother. She opened her eyes to find herself listing heavily to the left, her head dangerously close to the shoulder of the stranger next to her. "I'm so sorry," she mumbled, jerking upright. The movement made her dizzy. When was the last time she'd drunk water? Maximilian glanced at her, and for the first time, really saw her. She was pretty, in an exhausted, overwhelmed sort of way. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes looked like they'd been slept in, which they probably had. But there was something else too, something in the determined set of her jaw that suggested a strength born from necessity rather than choice. "It's fine," he said curtly, returning his attention to his phone. The plane lifted. Off, and Theo pressed his face to the window, watching Seattle's lights fall away beneath them. "Mama, look, we're flying." Helena mustered a smile. "We sure are, baby." "Where are the stars?" "Behind the clouds. They're still there, even when we can't see them." The simple exchange made something twist in Maximilian's chest. He'd never wanted children, never seen the appeal of sticky hands and constant questions. But there was something about the way the boy looked at his mother, with complete trust and unconditional love, that made Maximilian wonder what he'd been missing. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin lights dimmed. Helena checked on Theo one more time, making sure his seatbelt was secure, his blanket tucked around him. Then she settled back in her seat, exhaustion pulling at her like an undertow. "Long day?" Maximilian found himself asking, surprising himself. He never made small talk with strangers. Helena laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Long year, long life. Actually. Boston for business or pleasure?" "Neither. My mother's dying." The words came out flat, matter of fact. She'd said them so many times in the past weeks they'd lost their power to hurt. Or maybe she was just too tired to feel anything anymore. Maximilian had no response to that. He was a man who solved problems with money and strategy, not emotions and condolences. "I'm sorry," seemed inadequate, so he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Helena felt her eyelids growing heavy again. She fought it, knowing she needed to stay awake, but her body had other ideas. Beside her, Theo had already succumbed to sleep, his small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of childhood slumber. Just a few minutes, Helena thought. Just rest my eyes for a few minutes. Her head tilted to the left. This time, she didn't catch herself. This time, she fell asleep against Maximilian Thorne's shoulder, her dark hair spilling across. His expensive suit jacket like ink on paper. Maximilian froze. He should wake her up, should gently push her away. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she'd said, "My mother's dying," with such defeated acceptance. Maybe it was the dark circles under her eyes. Maybe it was the small boy sleeping peacefully by the window, unaware that his world was about to shatter. Or maybe it was the desperate, insane idea that suddenly bloomed in Maximilian's mind. He looked down at the sleeping woman on his shoulder. She was a complete stranger. He didn't even know her name. But she had a son, which meant she'd been married or at least in a serious relationship. She was traveling to see her dying mother, which suggested she was a person of character, someone who honored family obligations. And she was clearly in some kind of financial distress, based on her worn clothes and the way she'd been counting singles at the gate counter earlier. Financial distress he could solve. He was very good at solving problems with money. The idea was insane. Completely, utterly insane. But as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, as Helena slept trustingly against his shoulder, as the clock ticked down toward 8 a.m. and the reading of his grandfather's will, Maximilian began to calculate. He could offer her money, enough to solve whatever problems she had. In exchange, she'd marry him, immediately, before 8 a.m. They'd pose as a couple for however long it took to satisfy the estate executors, a year, maybe 2. Then they'd divorce, she'd walk away wealthy, and he'd retain control of his family's empire. It was a business transaction, clean, simple, mutually beneficial. Except there was nothing clean or simple about what he was contemplating. Marriage, even a fake one, came with complications. There were laws, legal entanglements, emotional risks. And there was the boy to consider, Theo. The child would become part of this deception, whether Helena intended it or not. Maximilian looked out the window at the darkness beyond. Somewhere below, America slept, unaware that in this pressurized metal tube, a decision was being made that would alter multiple lives in ways no one could predict. He pulled out his phone and typed a text to Richard. "I might have found a solution. Stand by." Richard's response was immediate. "Thank God. Who is she?" Maximilian looked at the sleeping woman. "I don't know yet, but I'm about to find out. Don't miss a thing." Subscribe now and discover the ending of this and other thrilling and dramatic stories. Helena dreamed of her mother, not the frail, cancer-ravaged woman lying in a Boston hospital bed, but the strong, vibrant mother of her childhood. They were in their old kitchen in Helena's hometown of Missoula, Montana, baking chocolate chip cookies. The smell filled her senses, warm and comforting. Her mother was laughing, flour dusting her apron, saying something about how life always worked out if you, just kept faith. Then the dream shifted. She was signing papers, lots of papers, and someone was putting a ring on her finger. A beautiful ring, diamonds catching the light. She tried to see the person's face, but it was blurred, indistinct. "Do you agree?" a voice asked. "Do you consent?" "Yes," Dream Helena said. "Yes, I do." She woke to the captain's voice announcing their descent into Boston Logan International Airport. For a moment, Helena was disoriented, confused by the unfamiliar weight against her head. Then she realized with horror that she'd spent the entire 5-hour flight asleep on a stranger's shoulder. She jerked upright, her face flushing. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Maximilian turned to her, and she was struck by how intensely blue his eyes were. "Don't apologize. You clearly needed the rest." Helena rubbed her face, trying to make herself presentable. Beside her, Theo was stirring, rubbing his eyes. The plane banked, and Helena saw the lights of Boston spreading below them like a carpet of stars. "I'm Helena," she said, feeling like she should at least introduce herself to the man whose shoulders she'd drooled on for 5 hours. Helena Müller, Maximilian Thorn. He extended his hand, and she shook it, noticing the expensive watch on his wrist, the perfectly manicured nails. This man was money. Old money from the looks of it. Thorn? Helena repeated. Like Thorn Industries? You've heard of it. Hard not to. You guys make half. The tech I can't afford. She meant it as a joke, but it came out bitter. Everything came out bitter these days. The plane touched down, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Helena helped Theo with his backpack, checking to make sure he had his stuffed elephant, the one comfort item she couldn't afford to lose. As they stood to deplane, Maximilian made his decision. It was now or never. Helena, he said, his voice low, so only she could hear. I need to speak with you. Privately. It's important. She looked at him, confused. I don't understand. What could you possibly need to speak to me about? An opportunity. One that could change your life. Helena's instinct screamed at her to walk away. Nothing good came from strangers making vague promises. But something in Maximilian's expression made her pause. He looked desperate, which seemed impossible for a billionaire. What could he possibly be desperate for? I'm meeting my mother at the hospital, she said. I don't have time for 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes of your time, and I promise you won't regret it. Theo tugged at her sleeve. Mama, I'm hungry. Helena looked at her son, then at Maximilian, then at the long line of passengers shuffling toward the exit. She should say no, should walk away from whatever this was. But desperation recognized desperation, and she saw something in Maximilian's eyes that mirrored her own situation. 5 minutes, she agreed. But that's it. They exited the plane into the terminal. It was nearly 6 a.m. and the airport was beginning to wake up. Janitors pushed wide mops across the floors, and early morning travelers stumbled toward their gates. Maximilian led them to a quiet corner near a closed Starbucks. What's this about? Helena asked, keeping Theo close to her side. Maximilian had rehearsed this speech in his head for the past hour, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt impossible to say. How did you ask a stranger to marry you? How did you explain that you needed a wife like other people needed coffee or oxygen? I'm going to be very direct, he began. I know this will sound insane, but I need you to hear me out completely before you respond. Can you do that? Helena crossed her arms. I'm listening. I need a wife, immediately, by 8 a.m. this morning, to be specific. My grandfather passed away 3 weeks ago, and according to his will, I can only inherit if I'm married. The entire family fortune, $6 billion and controlling interest in Thorn Industries, will be distributed to distant cousins if I can't produce a wife at the reading this morning. He paused, gauging her reaction. Helena's face was unreadable, which he took as a good sign. At least she wasn't running away yet. I know we're strangers, he continued. I know this sounds completely insane, but here's what I'm proposing. Marry me this morning, before 8 a.m. Pose as my wife for 1 year. Live in my home, appear at necessary social functions, help me satisfy the requirements of the will. At the end of 1 year, we'll divorce. You'll receive $5 million, and we'll go our separate ways. No strings attached, no expectations beyond the public appearance of marriage. Helena stared at him. Then she started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that comes when reality becomes so absurd you can't process it any other way. You're joking, she said. This is some kind of prank, right? Where's the camera? I'm completely serious. I'll have my lawyers draw up a contract right now. $5 million, Helena. Think about what that money could do for you, for your mother, for your son. The mention of Theo made her anger flare. Don't bring my son into this. You don't know anything about us. You're right, I don't. But I know you're here because your mother is dying. I know you flew economy in worn clothes and counted dollar bills at the gate. I know you're exhausted and stressed and probably drowning in medical bills. I can fix all of that. 1 year of your life, Helena. Is that really so much to ask in exchange for financial security? Helena looked down at Theo, who was playing with his stuffed elephant, oblivious to the adult conversation happening around him. $5 million. She tried to imagine that amount of money. It was impossible. It was the kind of number she'd only ever seen in news articles about lottery winners and hedge fund managers. It would pay for her mother's treatment, pay off her debts, give Theo a stable childhood, good schools, opportunities she could never provide on her waitress salary. But marriage? To a complete stranger? Even a fake marriage felt like a bridge too far. "This is insane," she said. "You're asking me to completely uproot my life, move to wherever you live, pretend to be in love with you. Boston. I live in Boston, in a mansion in Back Bay. You wouldn't have to pretend to be in love with me in private. Only in, public. The rest of the time, we'd lead separate lives. You'd have your own wing of the house, complete privacy. Theo would have his own room, access to the best schools in Massachusetts. You'd want for nothing. Except my dignity, my independence, Your mother," Maximilian interrupted. "Helena, how much time does she have? Weeks? Days? How are you paying for her care? Do you have insurance? Can you afford experimental treatments if they become available?" It was a low blow, and he knew. But time was running out, and desperation made people cruel. Helena felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been so strong for so long, holding everything together with duct tape and determination. But Maximilian had just reached into her chest and squeezed her heart. He was right about all of it. Her mother's medical bills were crushing her. The hospital had already called twice about overdue payments. They'd be lucky if her mother lived another month. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You're a billionaire. You must know hundreds of women who would jump at this opportunity." "That's precisely why not them. Anyone from my social circle would have ulterior motives, would try to extend the arrangement beyond our agreed terms. You're a stranger. You have no connections to my world, no reason to complicate things. We'd have a business arrangement, nothing more." Helena closed her eyes. This was crazy. Absolutely, completely crazy. But when was the last time her life had made sense? When was the last time she'd been able to make a decision that wasn't born from desperation and exhaustion? "I need to think," she said. "We don't have time. The will reading is at 8. It's now 6:15. We need to get to City Hall when it opens at 7. Get married, and be at my family's lawyer's office by 8. Every minute we waste is a minute we can't afford." "Mama?" Theo looked up at her. "Can we get breakfast soon?" Helena looked at her son. He deserved so much better than the life she'd been able to give him. Better than their cramped apartment with the leaky roof. Better than secondhand clothes and food stamps. Better than watching his mother work double shifts and still struggle to keep the lights on. She looked at Maximilian. He was offering her a way out. A deeply weird, uncomfortable, probably going to end badly way out, but a way out, nonetheless. "What about while I'm sleeping on the plane?" she said slowly. "You said something. You asked me questions." Maximilian's expression didn't change. "Did I?" "I dreamed about signing papers, about someone putting a ring on my finger, about agreeing to something." She narrowed her eyes. "What did you say to me while I was asleep?" For a fraction of a second, Maximilian looked uncomfortable. "I may have asked if you'd consider a business proposal. You said yes. While I was asleep. You seemed very agreeable. You can't seriously think a sleep-mumbled yes counts as consent." "No," he admitted. "Which is why I'm asking you now, while you're fully conscious and aware. Marry me, Helena. 1 year. $5 million. Be honest with yourself. Can you afford to say no?" She couldn't. That was the awful truth. She couldn't afford to say no, couldn't afford to let pride or common sense stand in the way of this opportunity. Theo deserved better. Her mother deserved better. And Helena deserved a chance, just one chance, to not be drowning. $7 million, she said. Maximilian blinked. "Excuse me? You said—" $5 million, I want 7. If you're asking me to completely uproot my life, to lie to your family and friends, to play house with a stranger for a year, then I want $7 million. That's my price. A slow smile spread across Maximilian's face. You drive a hard bargain, Helena Muller. Take it or leave it. He extended his hand. Deal. $7 million, payable at the end of 1 year, provided you fulfill all terms of the contract. Helena hesitated for one more second. This was, the point of no return. She could still walk away, could still choose to struggle through life on her own terms. But what were those terms worth when she couldn't even feed her son properly? She shook his hand. Deal. Maximilian pulled out his phone. Richard, wake up every lawyer in the firm. I need a marriage contract drafted in the next 30 minutes, and find out when City Hall opens. We're getting married this morning. Helena heard the voice on the other end explode in shocked questions. Maximilian answered briefly, his eyes never leaving Helena's face. When he hung up, he said, My lawyers will meet us at City Hall with the contract. You'll have a chance to review it before we proceed. If there's anything you're uncomfortable with, we'll negotiate. How generous, Helena said dryly. I'm asking you to trust me with a year of your life. The least I can do is ensure you're protected legally. Mama? Theo tugged at her hand again. Who is this man? Are we going to… Grandma now. Helena knelt down to Theo's level. How did you explain this to a 4-year-old? How did you tell your son that you were about to marry a stranger because you couldn't afford not to? Theo, baby, this is Maximilian. He's going to help us. Help Grandma. Do you understand? Theo looked at Maximilian with the open curiosity of childhood. Are you a doctor? No, Maximilian said, and something in his voice softened. But I have money that can pay for doctors. Good doctors who can help. Your grandma feel better. Oh? Theo considered this. That's good. Grandma's been sick for a long time. The simple acceptance in the child's voice made Helena's throat tighten. Theo had been so brave through all of this, never complaining, never asking why they couldn't afford the things other kids had. He deserved this chance. Whatever happened with this insane arrangement, Theo deserved security. Maximilian checked his watch. City Hall opens in 40 minutes. We need to move. They took a cab to Boston City Hall, a brutalist concrete structure that looked more like a parking garage than a government building. Maximilian's lawyers were already waiting outside, 3 men in expensive suits looking harried and confused. Richard, the eldest and apparently the head of the legal team, approached Maximilian with a thick folder of documents. You're serious about this? You're actually going through with it? Do I look like I'm joking? Maximilian took the folder and turned to Helena. This is the contract. Take your time reading it. I told them to be thorough. Helena sat on a nearby bench and began reading, while Theo explored the plaza under her watchful eye. The contract was dense, full of legal language she barely understood, but the basic terms were clear. 1 year of marriage, public appearances as needed, separate living arrangements within the marital home, no expectation of physical intimacy, and $7 million payable upon divorce. There were clauses about infidelity, prohibited, public scandal, grounds for immediate termination of contract, and child rearing. Theo's education and medical care would be fully covered during the marriage term. It was the most clinical approach to marriage Helena had ever seen, reducing what should be a union of love to a series of obligations and financial incentives. This says I have to attend social functions, Helena noted. I don't have appropriate clothes for billionaire parties. We'll take care of that, Maximilian said. You'll have a discretionary budget for wardrobe and personal expenses. Just charge it to the household account. Helena continued reading. The contract was actually quite fair, protecting her interests as much as his. There were escape clauses if either party found the arrangement untenable, though she'd forfeit the money if she left early. There were provisions for Theo's schooling, her mother's medical care, even a clause about what would happen if Helena wanted to date. Someone during the contract year, permitted with discretion. What about you? She asked. Can you date during this year? Maximilian's jaw tightened. The contract prohibits both of us from public relationships with others. In private, what we do is our own business, as long as it doesn't create scandal. But to the outside world, we need to present as a legitimately married couple. And after, when we divorce, we tell people we grew apart. Irreconcilable differences. We part amicably, wish each other well and move on. My lawyers will handle all the paperwork to make it as painless as possible. Helena looked at her son, who was making his stuffed elephant fly around the plaza. 1 year, $7 million. Security for Theo, treatment for her mother, and a chance to breathe for the first time in longer than she could remember. She picked up the pen Richard offered her. Where do I sign? Already subscribed. Leave a like and tell us where you're watching from. We want to know where our audience comes from. The marriage ceremony was the least romantic thing Helena had ever experienced. City Hall had just opened, and they were the first couple in line for a marriage license. The clerk, a bored-looking woman named Martha, processed their paperwork with the enthusiasm of someone filling out tax forms. First marriage? Martha asked Helena without looking up. Second, Helena admitted. Theo's father had been husband number 1, a brief and disastrous union that ended when Helena was 5 months pregnant. Some mistakes you only made once. First for me, Maximilian said. Martha raised an eyebrow. You sure you don't want to think about this a little longer? You both look like you're about to face a firing squad. We're sure, Helena and Maximilian said in unison. The ceremony took all of 5 minutes. The officiant, a tired-looking man who probably conducted a dozen weddings before lunch, rattled through the standard vows. Helena felt numb as she repeated the words, I, Helena Marie Müller, take you, Maximilian Andreas Thorn, to be my lawfully wedded husband. Maximilian produced a ring from his pocket, a simple platinum band that somehow fit perfectly on Helena's finger. Later, she'd wonder how he'd managed that, whether he'd guessed her size or had one of his lawyers buy an adjustable ring. In the moment, she just stared at the metal glinting on her hand, trying to process that she was now married to a complete stranger. You may kiss. The bride, the officiant said. Helena and Maximilian looked at each other. This was the moment, the seal on their bizarre arrangement. Maximilian leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Helena held her ground. It was just a kiss, just a formality. It didn't mean anything. Their lips met, brief and chaste. But something sparked, some unexpected connection that made Helena's pulse quicken. She pulled back quickly, disturbed by her own reaction. This was a business arrangement. She couldn't afford to feel anything real. Theo, who had been watching with wide eyes, said, Mama, why did you kiss that man? Because we just got married, baby, Helena said, her voice shaking slightly. Oh, Theo processed this. Does that mean he's my dad now? The question hung in the air like smoke. Maximilian's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Helena didn't know how to answer. In legal terms, no. Maximilian had no parental rights or responsibilities. But in practical terms, for the next year, he'd be the closest thing to a father figure in Theo's life. It's complicated, Helena finally said. Maximilian knelt down to Theo's level, surprising everyone. I'm not your dad, he said gently. But I'm married to your mom now, which means we're family. We're going to live together, and I'm going to help take care of you and your mom. Is that okay with you? Theo studied him with the seriousness only a 4-year-old could muster. Then he nodded. Okay. Can I still call you, Maximilian? That's a really long name. You can call me Max. Max, Theo repeated, testing it out. Okay, Max. Do you like elephants? Despite everything, Maximilian smiled. I don't know much about elephants. Why don't you tell me about them? As Theo launched into an enthusiastic explanation of elephant facts he'd learned from nature documentaries, Helena felt something shift in her chest. Maximilian didn't have to be kind to Theo. The contract didn't require it. But here he was, kneeling on the floor of Boston City Hall, listening with apparent interest as a 4-year-old told him about elephant trunks and savanna habitats. Maybe, Helena thought, This wouldn't be as terrible as she'd feared. Richard approached with a tablet. The marriage certificate has been filed electronically. You're officially married in the eyes of the law. Max, the will reading is in 30 minutes. We need to go. Helena checked the time. I need to get to the hospital. My mother. I'll have a car take. You, Maximilian said, and Helena, tell your mother not to worry about her medical bills. They're taken care of, all of them. You can't just... I can, and I did. While you were reading the contract, I had my assistant contact Massachusetts General Hospital and pay your mother's outstanding balance. Consider it a wedding present. Helena felt tears well up. She'd been carrying the weight of those bills for months, watching the numbers climb higher every week, knowing she'd probably never be able to pay them off. And with a single phone call, Maximilian had erased them. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded, then turned to his lawyers. Let's go settle this inheritance. As Maximilian left for the will reading, Helena and Theo got into a sleek black town car that had appeared as if by magic. The driver already knew where to take them, which meant Maximilian had planned even this detail. Helena settled into the leather seats, holding Theo close, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. She was married. To a billionaire, a stranger who had somehow convinced her to sign away a year of her life in exchange for more money than she'd ever imagined having. What had she done? The hospital was on the other side of Boston, and the driver navigated through morning traffic with practiced ease. Helena watched the city pass by her window, seeing it with new eyes. This was her home now. Boston, a place she'd never planned to live, in a life she'd never planned to lead. When they arrived at Massachusetts General, Helena found her mother's room on the 4th floor. Elizabeth Muller looked so small in the hospital bed, as if cancer had stolen not just her health, but her very substance. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and the oxygen cannula under her nose whispered with each breath. But when she saw Helena and Theo, her face lit up. My babies, she said, her voice weak but warm. You made it. Helena hugged her mother carefully, afraid she might break. Of course we made it, Mom. I told you we would. Theo climbed onto the bed, snuggling against his grandmother. Grandma, we flew on a plane. It was so high up. Elizabeth stroked his hair, tears slipping down her weathered cheeks. Tell me all about it, sweetheart. As Theo chatted about the flight, Helena noticed the room. It was different from the last time she'd visited. Better. Private, with a view of the city. There were fresh flowers on the windowsill and a new flat-screen TV on the wall. Mom, did they move you to a different room? Elizabeth looked confused. This morning. The nurses said it was an upgrade. Something about insurance coverage changing? I didn't understand it all. Helena understood. Maximilian. Even before the wedding, he'd been making arrangements. The realization made her feel both grateful and unsettled. This man she'd married had power she couldn't fully comprehend, the ability to reshape reality with a phone call. After a while, Theo fell asleep. Against his grandmother, exhausted from the long journey. Elizabeth looked at Helena with the knowing gaze that only mothers possess. Something's different about you, she said. Something happened. Helena looked at the ring on her finger, the platinum band that weighed almost nothing but felt impossibly heavy. She'd planned to tell her mother the truth, but now, faced with her parents' fragile health, she found the words impossible. I met someone, she said instead. On the plane. Elizabeth's eyes widened. Helena, that was yesterday. You can't possibly. I married him, Mom. The shock on her mother's face would have been comical in any other situation. You what? His name is Maximilian Thorne. How did you even begin to explain? He's wealthy. Very wealthy. And he needed a wife for legal reasons. And I needed help with your medical bills. And it's all very complicated, but it's temporary. 1 year. But during that year, Theo and I will be taken care of. You'll get the best medical treatment available. And when it's over, we'll have enough money to start fresh. Elizabeth closed her eyes. Oh, honey, what have you done? What I had to do. What you would have done if our positions were reversed. But marriage, Helena, even a temporary marriage is still a marriage. You're binding yourself legally, emotionally. It's a business arrangement, nothing more. I'm not going to fall in love with him, if that's what you're worried about. This is purely practical. Elizabeth reached for her daughter's hand. You can't control love, sweetheart. It doesn't respect contracts or practical arrangements. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't lose yourself in this. Helena wanted to promise, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she promise not to lose herself when she barely knew who she was anymore? Single mother, struggling waitress, dutiful daughter. Those were the roles she'd played for so long they'd become her identity. Now, she was adding another, wife to a billionaire. The role seemed so absurd, so far removed from her reality, that she couldn't imagine it becoming anything real. I'll be careful, she said instead. They sat in comfortable silence, Theo sleeping between them, until a nurse came in to check Elizabeth's vitals. As the nurse worked, Helena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Will reading complete. Inheritance secured. Driver will pick you up at 2 p.m. to bring you to the house. We need to discuss living arrangements. Max. Living arrangements. Helena had been so focused on the immediate crisis, the marriage license and the inheritance, that she hadn't fully processed what came next. She'd agreed to live with Maximilian for a year, in his mansion, in a life completely foreign to everything she'd known. Mama, Theo had woken up. I'm hungry. Helena checked her wallet. She had maybe $30 left, barely enough for a meal at the hospital cafeteria. Then she remembered. She was married to a billionaire now. Money, at least, was no longer a problem. The thought felt surreal. They ate lunch in the hospital cafeteria, and at 2 p.m. sharp, the same black town car appeared at the hospital entrance. The driver, a professional man who introduced himself as James, helped them into the car with their meager luggage, one duffel bag containing all their possessions for this trip. The drive to Maximilian's house took 20 minutes through Boston's historic streets. They entered the Back Bay neighborhood, where brownstones worth millions lined tree-canopied streets. The car turned onto Commonwealth Avenue and pulled up to a mansion that made Helena's breath catch. It was a 5-story brownstone that looked like it belonged on the cover of Architectural Digest. Ivy climbed the facade, and the windows gleamed in the afternoon sun. A small garden fronted the property, somehow lush even in early spring. This is where we're going to live? Theo asked, awed. Apparently, Helena said faintly. James helped them out and carried their bag to the front door. It opened before they could knock, revealing a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled into an immaculate bun. Mrs. Thorne, the woman said warmly. Welcome home. I'm Mrs. Blackwell, the house manager. Mr. Thorne asked me to help you get settled. Mrs. Thorne. Helena had to suppress a slightly hysterical laugh. 2 hours married, and people were already calling her by a name that didn't feel like hers. Mrs. Blackwell led them inside, and Helena tried not to gawk. The foyer alone was larger than her entire Montana apartment. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and a grand staircase swept upward to the second floor. Original art hung on the walls, paintings Helena suspected cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Mr. Thorne is in his study, Mrs. Blackwell said. He asked me to give you a tour first. This way, please. The tour was overwhelming. There was a formal dining room that could seat 20, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a state-of-the-art kitchen, a home theater, a gym, and more rooms than Helena could keep track of. The third floor housed Maximilian's private quarters, and the fourth floor had been prepared for Helena and Theo. This is your suite, Mrs. Blackwell said, opening a door to reveal a spacious sitting room decorated in soft creams and blues. Your bedroom is through here, and the young man's room is connected. Through this door. Theo's room was a child's dream. There was a race car bed, shelves of toys and books, and a window seat overlooking the garden. Theo ran to the toys with a delighted cry, leaving Helena standing in the doorway, feeling more out of place than ever. Mr. Thorne wanted to ensure the boy would be comfortable, Mrs. Blackwell said softly. He had us set up the room yesterday. Yesterday. Before they were even married. Before Helena had said yes. Maximilian had been that confident. She'd agree? Or had he simply been that desperate? Helena's bedroom was equally stunning. A king-sized bed dominated the space, and French doors opened onto a small balcony. The attached bathroom featured a soaking tub and a shower with multiple heads. Everything was perfect, impersonal, like a 5-star hotel room. "I've unpacked your things," Mrs. Blackwell said. "I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of ordering some additional clothing for you and the boy. The packages should arrive tomorrow. Mr. Thorne mentioned you traveled light." "That's very kind," Helena managed. She felt like she was underwater, sounds muffled, movements slow. After Mrs. Blackwell left, Helena stood in her new bedroom and tried to process her new reality. Less than 12 hours ago, she'd been boarding a plane in Seattle, broke and desperate. Now she was standing in a mansion in Boston, married to a billionaire, with a child playing happily in the next room. It felt like someone else's life, like she'd stepped into a movie or a dream. A knock on the door made her jump. Maximilian stood in the hallway, still wearing his suit from the will reading. He looked tired, the stress of the day evident in the lines around his eyes. "How did it go?" Helena asked. "The inheritance?" "Secured. The lawyers grilled me for 2 hours, demanded proof of our marriage, background information on you. But the marriage certificate was legitimate, and we passed their scrutiny. I'm now officially in control of Thorne Industries and my grandfather's estate." "Congratulations," he smiled wryly. "Thank you. How's your mother?" "Comfortable. The room upgrade was unnecessary but appreciated." "It wasn't unnecessary. She deserves comfort in her final days." He paused. "I'm sorry. That was insensitive." "It was honest. I appreciate honesty more than platitudes." Helena gestured to the room. "This is all a bit overwhelming." "I imagine it is. I wanted to discuss house rules, if you have a moment." They sat in Helena's sitting room while Theo played in the next room. Maximilian seemed uncomfortable, like he was trying to navigate social rules he didn't fully understand. "We'll need to appear united in public," he began. "Hold hands, exchange appropriate affection, attend events together. But in private, within these walls, we maintain our separate lives. You have complete autonomy over how you spend your time, where you go, what you do. The only restriction is avoiding public scandal." "Define scandal." "Don't get arrested. Don't give interviews about our marriage without clearing it with me first. Don't post about our private life on social media. Basic discretion. I can manage that. Theo will need to be enrolled in school. I've arranged for him to start at Pemberton Academy, one of the best private schools in Boston. They have an excellent preschool program." Helena bristled. "You should have consulted me before enrolling my son anywhere." "You're right. I apologize. I'm used to making decisions unilaterally. This will take adjustment for both of us." He pulled out his phone. "I'll have my assistant send you information on several schools. You choose which one feels right for Theo." The concession surprised her. Helena had expected Maximilian to be more controlling, given his position and personality, but he seemed genuinely willing to compromise. "What about my mother?" she asked. "I need to visit her regularly." "Of course. James is at your disposal. Use him whenever. You need transportation, or there's a car in the garage you're welcome to use." "I don't have a driver's license. Never needed one in rural Montana." Maximilian looked surprised. "We'll arrange lessons if you'd like, or continue using James. Whatever makes you comfortable." They discussed logistics for another hour. Household schedules, meal arrangements, staff interactions. It was the most business-like conversation about marriage Helena could imagine, devoid of emotion, but practical. By the end, they had a working framework for their year together. As Maximilian stood to leave, Helena said, "Why did you really choose me? There must have been other options, other women you could have asked." He paused at the door. "I told you. You had no connections to my world, no ulterior motives. That's a rational explanation. But you made this decision in the middle of the night, on a plane, with hours to go before the deadline. Rational decision-making doesn't happen under those conditions. So, why me? Really? Maximilian was quiet for a long moment. You were kind to your son on the plane, patient, even though you were exhausted. And when I saw you sleeping against my shoulder, you looked peaceful. Like for those few hours, you weren't carrying the weight of the world, I thought. He trailed off. You thought what? I thought maybe we could help each other carry our respective burdens, even if just for a year. It was the most honest thing he'd said since they met, and it made Helena see him differently, not as a cold billionaire buying his way out of a problem, but as a man struggling with impossible choices, just like her. Thank you for being honest, she said quietly. After he left, Helena lay on her new bed and stared at the ceiling. Theo's laughter drifted from the next room, where he was apparently conducting an elaborate game with his new toys. Her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Her mother had fallen asleep watching TV, resting comfortably. Everything was fine. Everything was better than fine. So why did Helena feel like she'd just made a deal with the devil? The days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Helena woke early, helped Theo get ready, and took him to Pemberton Academy, where he quickly made friends in the preschool class. Then she'd visit her mother at the hospital, spending hours by her bedside, talking about anything and everything. Elizabeth's condition stabilized with the better care, and while the doctors warned there would be no miracle cure, at least she was comfortable. Evenings were the strangest part. Helena and Maximilian had dinner together, a courtesy more than a requirement. Mrs. Blackwell prepared elaborate meals that they ate in the formal dining room, making stilted conversation across 6 feet of polished mahogany. "How was your day?" Maximilian would ask. "Fine. Yours?" "Productive." And that would be the extent of their interaction, unless Theo was present. With Theo, Maximilian transformed. He'd get down on the floor and play with action figures, read bedtime stories in different voices, answer endless questions about how things worked. It was clear he had no experience with children, but he was trying, genuinely trying, and Theo adored him for it. 2 weeks into the arrangement, Helena's mother asked to meet Maximilian. They visited the hospital together, presenting as a married couple. Elizabeth studied Maximilian with a mother's keen eye, asking pointed questions about his intentions and his commitment to her daughter. "I know this is unusual," Maximilian said, "but I give you my word that Helena and Theo will be cared for, protected, and provided for as long as they're in my home." "And after?" Elizabeth pressed. "When the year is up?" "After, Helena will have the resources to build whatever life she chooses." Elizabeth looked at her daughter. "And you're truly okay with this arrangement?" Helena took her mother's hand. "I am, I promise." What she didn't say was that the arrangement was becoming less uncomfortable with each passing day. She'd expected to feel like an imposter in Maximilian's world, but instead, she felt oddly settled. The house staff treated her with respect. Theo was thriving, and Maximilian, despite his emotional reserve, was proving to be a decent housemate. The first real challenge came 3 weeks into the marriage, when Maximilian's mother arrived unannounced for dinner. Victoria Thorne was everything Helena had feared. Elegant, imperious, and clearly unimpressed by her son's choice of bride. She swept into the mansion like a winter storm, her designer clothing and perfect hair making Helena feel shabby in comparison, despite the new wardrobe Maximilian had provided. Just one click. Subscribe, leave a like, and say where you're watching from. Your support is essential for our growth. "So you're the girl who trapped my son into marriage," Victoria said over the first course, her voice dripping with disdain. Helena set down her fork carefully. "I didn't trap anyone, Mrs. Thorne. This arrangement was mutually agreed upon." "Arrangement." Victoria seized on the word. "So you admit this isn't a real marriage?" Maximilian intervened. "Mother, Helena is my wife and deserves your respect. Your wife of 3 weeks. Forgive me if I'm skeptical about the authenticity of such a rushed union." The dinner devolved from there, Victoria peppered Helena with questions about her background, her education, her family. Each answer seemed to confirm Victoria's worst suspicions, that Helena was an opportunistic nobody who had ensnared her son for his money. After dinner, Victoria cornered Helena in the hall. "I don't know what game you're playing," she hissed, "but I will not let you destroy everything my family has built. Sign a post-nuptial agreement waiving your rights to his assets, or I'll make your life hell." Helena felt her temper, usually carefully controlled, snap. "Your son came to me, Mrs. Thorne, not the other way around. He needed a wife to satisfy your father-in-law's archaic will, and I agreed to help him. This marriage exists because of your family's dysfunction, not my ambition. So if you want someone to blame for this situation, look in the mirror." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "How dare you?" "I dare because I have nothing to lose. You can't threaten me with poverty when I've lived with it my entire life. You can't threaten me with social exclusion when I was never part of your world to begin with. The only person who can end this arrangement is your son, and last I checked, he seems satisfied with the terms." Maximilian appeared in the hallway. "Mother, it's time for you to leave." "Maximilian, this girl is completely inappropriate. This girl is my wife, and you will treat her accordingly, or you won't be welcome in my home. Your choice." The shock on Victoria's face was almost comical. Clearly she wasn't accustomed to her son standing up to her. She sputtered, gathered her belongings, and left in a fury, promising this wasn't over. After she was gone, Helena collapsed on the stairs, adrenaline making her shake. Maximilian sat beside her, close but not touching. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "My mother has always been difficult." "That's putting it mildly." Helena laughed, slightly hysterical. "She thinks I'm trying to destroy your family legacy. My family legacy was destroying itself long before you arrived. My grandfather's will, my mother's controlling nature, the constant pressure to be something I'm not. That's been my reality since birth. At least with you, I know where I stand. There's no hidden agenda, no manipulation, just an honest business arrangement." "Is that really all this is?" Helena asked quietly. "An honest business arrangement?" Maximilian looked at her, and for a moment, Helena thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or possibility. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought it would be. But Theo asks me about my day at breakfast. You leave notes on the kitchen counter reminding me about appointments. You laugh at my terrible jokes during dinner. These weren't part of the contract, but they've become part of our daily life. So maybe it's more than a business arrangement. Maybe it's becoming something closer to a real partnership." Helena's heart did something complicated in her chest. She'd promised herself she wouldn't develop feelings for Maximilian. This was temporary, practical, nothing more. But he was making it very difficult to maintain emotional distance when he said things like that. "Your mother is going to make our lives difficult," she said, changing the subject to safer ground. "Probably, but she'll come around eventually. She always does." He was wrong. Victoria launched a campaign against Helena that would have been impressive if it wasn't so mean-spirited. She started rumors in Boston's social circles, questioning Helena's background and motivations. She sent private investigators to dig into Helena's past, looking for scandals that didn't exist. She even contacted Helena's ex-husband, Theo's father, trying to stir up custody issues. That last move was the final straw. Helena had kept Theo's father out of their lives for good reason. He'd been abusive, controlling, and wanted nothing to do with his son after Helena left. The fact that Victoria would weaponize that relationship showed how far she was willing to go. Maximilian dealt with his mother swiftly and decisively. He had his lawyers send a cease and desist letter, threatening to cut her off from the family trust if she continued her harassment. Victoria backed off, but the damage was done. Helena now understood the kind of family she'd married into, wealthy, powerful, and willing to destroy anyone they perceived as a threat. Through it all, Theo remained blissfully unaware of the adult drama. He loved his new school, his new room, and most of all, his new family. He'd started calling Maximilian Max Dad, a portmanteau that made Maximilian visibly uncomfortable but also, Helena noticed, secretly pleased. One evening, 6 weeks into the arrangement, Helena found Maximilian in the library, reading a book about child development. She'd never seen him read anything that wasn't business-related. "Research?" she asked, settling into a nearby chair. He looked embarrassed. "Theo asked me today why the sky is blue. I didn't have a good answer. I thought I should be better prepared for future questions." Helena smiled. "You know you don't have to be perfect, right? Part of parenting is admitting when you don't know something. I'm not his parent. He trailed off, clearly unsure how to finish that sentence. "You're the man who reads him bedtime stories every night, who helps him with his homework, who taught him to tie his shoes last week. Whatever label you want to put on it, you're important to him." Maximilian closed the book. "That terrifies me." "Good. If you weren't terrified, I'd be worried. Every parent who actually cares is terrified they'll screw up their kid. But I'm not his parent. This is temporary. In less than a year, I'll be out of his life completely. How is that fair to him?" It was the question Helena had been avoiding, the one that kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what damage they were doing to Theo by letting him get attached to Maximilian. "I don't know if it's fair," she admitted. But the alternative was him growing up in poverty, watching his mother work herself to death, trying to keep a roof over our heads. At least this way, he has stability, opportunities, a chance at a better life, bought with emotional manipulation and lies. Welcome to adulthood. Everything costs something. They sat in silence, the weight of their decisions heavy between them. Finally, Maximilian said, "What if we extended the arrangement? Another year or two, or however long it takes for Theo to be older and better able to understand?" Helena's heart jumped. "You want to stay married longer? I want to minimize the damage to Theo. If that means maintaining this arrangement beyond the original term, I'm willing to do that. For an additional fee, presumably." His face hardened. "Not everything is about money, Helena," says the billionaire. Says the man who's currently reading a parenting book at 9 p.m. because a 4-year-old asked him a question he couldn't answer. Don't reduce this to a financial transaction when we both know it's become more complicated than that. He was right. They'd crossed some invisible line from business arrangement to something messier, something real. Helena could feel it in the way they'd started sharing coffee in the morning, in the casual touches that had replaced their initial careful distance, in the way Maximilian had started asking her opinion on business decisions. "I need to think about it," she said. "Take your time. The offer stands." But time was something Helena's mother didn't have. 3 days later, Elizabeth took a turn for the worse. Helena rushed to the hospital to find her mother struggling to breathe, her body finally giving up the fight. "Get Theo," Elizabeth whispered. "I need to see him one more time." Maximilian brought Theo to the hospital, and the 4 of them sat together in Elizabeth's room. Theo, too young to fully understand death, chatted about his day at school while his grandmother stroked his hair. With trembling fingers. "You be good for your mama," Elizabeth told him. "And for Max. He's a good man. Don't let him forget that." "I won't, Grandma," Theo promised. As the afternoon faded into evening, Elizabeth pulled Helena close. "I was wrong about him," she whispered. "The way he looks at you. That's not an arrangement. That's love, even if he doesn't know it yet. Mom, you're imagining things. I'm dying, Helena. Let me have my illusions. But I don't think they're illusions. I think you two are too stubborn to see what's right in front of you." Elizabeth Müller passed away peacefully that night, with her daughter holding one hand and her grandson holding the other. Maximilian stood in the doorway, giving them space for their grief, but ready to help if needed. The funeral was small, just Helena, Theo, a few of Elizabeth's friends from her book club, and Maximilian. Helena gave a eulogy that she barely remembered afterward, her words lost in the fog of grief. Theo cried when they lowered the casket, finally understanding that Grandma wasn't coming back. That night, Helena couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs to find Maximilian sitting alone in the dark library, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table beside him. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "I was thinking about my grandfather. I never got to say goodbye. He died while I was in a board meeting, and I didn't even know until 3 hours later. I kept working because that's what I've always done. Work first, feelings later. But feelings don't wait. They just build up until they explode." Helena sat beside him on the couch. "Is that what's happening now? Feelings exploding?" "I don't know. I don't know how to process feelings anymore. I've spent so long building walls, maintaining distance, keeping everyone at arm's length. It was easier that way, safer. And now I have a wife who challenges me at every turn, a kid who asks me impossible questions, a life that feels more real than anything I've experienced in decades, and I don't know what to do with any of it." Helena took his hand, a gesture that felt natural despite their agreement to maintain distance. "You could start by admitting that maybe this arrangement has become more than what we originally agreed to." Maximilian looked at their intertwined fingers. "If I admit that, everything changes. The contract becomes meaningless. We'd be entering uncharted territory with no rules, no guidelines, no protection for either of us. Sometimes the best things in life don't come with guidelines, and sometimes they end in disaster." Helena pulled her hand away, stung. "You're right. Better to keep everything safe and transactional. Wouldn't want actual human connection to complicate your perfect life." She stood to leave, but Maximilian caught her wrist. "Wait. I'm sorry. That came out wrong. I'm not good at this, at vulnerability. But I'm trying. Try harder. Because Theo isn't the only one getting attached here, and I can't afford to be the only one taking emotional risks." "You're not," he said quietly. "I think about you constantly. Wonder what you're doing, if you're happy, if you regret this arrangement. When I see you smile at something Theo says, or when you absently hum while making breakfast, or when you fall asleep reading on the couch. I notice these things. I think about these things. And it terrifies me because it's not in the contract. None of what I'm feeling is in the contract." Helena's breath caught. "What are you feeling?" "I don't know. I haven't had a name for it yet. But it's something. It's definitely something." They stood inches apart in the dark library, the space between them crackling with possibility. Helena knew this was the moment. She could step back, retreat to the safety of their business arrangement, maintain the walls they'd built. Or she could step forward into uncertain territory and see what happened when two people who'd agreed not to feel anything finally admitted they were lying to themselves. She stepped forward. Their kiss was nothing like the chaste peck at City Hall. This was hungry, desperate, months of tension finally finding release. Maximilian's hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and Helena felt herself melting into him, all her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Helena whispered, "That wasn't in the contract." "Definitely not," Maximilian agreed. "Should we add an amendment?" "Despite everything," Helena laughed, "you're incorrigible, and you're beautiful. I don't think I've ever told you that. You're beautiful, especially when you're challenging me or putting my mother in her place or just being yourself." They ended up on the couch, talking until dawn about everything and nothing. About Maximilian's childhood in a mansion where money couldn't buy affection, about Helena's struggles as a single mother, about their fears and hopes and the unexpected life they'd built together. As the sun rose over Boston, painting the library in shades of gold and rose, Maximilian said, "I don't want this to be temporary anymore. I don't want you to leave in 6 months. I want to try making this real." Helena's practical side screamed at her to be cautious. Real marriages failed every day, and they had more obstacles than most. But her heart, that traitorous organ she'd tried so hard to protect, was already halfway in love with this complicated, emotionally constipated billionaire who read parenting books and played action figures with her son. "Okay," she said, Let's try." They agreed to take things slow, to continue living in the house but dating like normal couples do. Maximilian started coming home earlier from work, and they'd have dinner together as a family, a real family, not three people playing roles. He took them to museums and parks, teaching Theo about dinosaurs and space, subjects he'd researched specifically to bond with the boy. Helena started attending Maximilian's business events, not as a contractual obligation, but as his partner. She learned to navigate the world of corporate fundraisers and charity galas, her natural intelligence and quick wit, making her popular in circles that had initially dismissed her as a gold digger. Victoria remained hostile but kept her distance, occasionally sending barbed comments but nothing more. Maximilian's father, a quiet man who'd divorced Victoria years ago, visited, and immediately took to Helena and Theo, much to Victoria's fury. 3 months passed, then 6. The 1-year mark approached, and with it, a decision that neither Helena nor Maximilian wanted to make. The contract specified that after 1 year, they'd divorce, and Helena would receive her payment. But the contract had become obsolete, replaced by something neither of them had expected, a real marriage, with all its complications and joys. 2 weeks before the anniversary, Helena found the contract in Maximilian's study. She'd been looking for a book and stumbled across the file, the legal document that had started everything. She read through it, remembering that desperate morning in Boston City Hall, when they'd been strangers agreeing to a mutually beneficial arrangement. How naive they'd been, how they'd thought they could live together for a year and remain emotionally detached. She heard footsteps and looked up to find Maximilian in the doorway. "Finding anything interesting?" "Just our contract. Hard to believe it's been almost a year." He sat beside her on the couch. "Do you regret it?" "Any of it?" Helena thought about the past 11 months, about her mother's final months spent in comfort instead of pain, about Theo thriving at his new school, making friends, developing interests beyond their cramped apartment in Montana, about the unexpected relationship that had bloomed between her and Maximilian, built on honesty and challenge and genuine affection. "I don't regret it," she said, "but I'm terrified of what happens next." "What do you want to happen next?" "I want—" Helena paused, organizing her thoughts. "I want to tear up this contract. I want to stop playing by rules we set when we didn't know each other. I want to build something real, something that's not limited to a 1-year term or a financial agreement." "That's what I want too," Maximilian said. "But I need to know you're choosing this freely, that you're not staying. Because of the money, or because you think it's better for Theo. If we do this, if we make this real, it has to be because you actually want to be married to me. To spend your life with me, with all my flaws and emotional dysfunction and overbearing mother." Helena laughed through tears she didn't know she'd been shedding. "I want all of it, even Victoria's passive-aggressive holiday cards." Maximilian pulled her close. "I love you. I should have said it months ago, but I was too afraid. Too worried I'd ruin this by admitting how I felt. But I love you, Helena. You and Theo. You're my family now, the only family that's ever really mattered." "I love you too," Helena whispered. "Even though you're emotionally stunted and terrible at expressing feelings and read parenting books like they're instruction manuals. Especially because of those things? Definitely because of those things." They spent the rest of the evening planning their future. Real plans, not contract terms. They'd sell the Boston mansion and buy something smaller, more suitable for a family. Maximilian would cut back his work hours, focus more on being present in their lives. They'd take a honeymoon, an actual honeymoon, somewhere tropical where Theo could play in the sand. But as they made these plans, neither of them could shake a growing sense of unease. They'd been so focused on their relationship that they'd forgotten about Theo's perspective. The contract might be ending, but what did that mean for a 5-year-old who'd only known stability for 11 months? The answer came 1 week before their anniversary, when Theo overheard Helena and Maximilian discussing the contract's end date. He didn't understand the legal terminology, but he understood enough. Max was leaving. The family he'd come to love, the security he'd finally found, was temporary. Helena found him crying in his room, his stuffed elephant clutched to his chest. "Baby, what's wrong?" "Is Max leaving?" Theo asked through tears. "Is he going to go away like Daddy did?" Helena's heart shattered. "No, sweetheart. Max isn't leaving. He's staying with us." "But you said the contract was ending. That means he doesn't have to be here anymore. That means he can leave." She hadn't realized Theo had been listening, hadn't considered how their adult conversations might sound to a child who'd already experienced abandonment. She sat on the bed and pulled him into her lap. "Theo, listen to me. Max is staying because he wants to stay. Because he loves us. The contract was just something grown-ups do to make things official. But the important part, the love part, that's real. Max is choosing to be your dad. Not because anyone is making him, but because he wants to be." "He's not my real dad, though," Theo said, his voice small. "My real dad didn't want me." Helena fought back tears. She'd known this conversation would come eventually, but she hadn't expected it to hurt this much. "Your biological father made a mistake, a huge mistake, but Max chose you. He chose to be in your life, to love you, to be your dad in all the ways that matter, and that makes him more real than someone who just shares DNA. But what if he changes his mind? What if I'm bad and he doesn't want me anymore?" It was Maximilian who answered, standing in the doorway. Helena didn't know how long he'd been there, but from the tears on his face, he'd heard enough. "Theo," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Come. Here." Theo ran to him, and Maximilian scooped him up, holding him tight. "I need you to understand something. I'm not leaving, ever. I love you. I love your mom. You're my son, not because of some paper we signed, but because you're mine. In my heart, where it matters. Do you understand? You promise?" "I promise. Cross my heart." Maximilian made an X over his heart, a gesture Helena had taught him. "I'm your dad, your Max dad. And nothing will ever change that." Theo buried his face in Maximilian's shoulder, his small body shaking with sobs. "I love you, Max dad. I love you too, little man. So much." Helena watched them, her own tears flowing freely. This was what her mother had seen months ago in the hospital. This was the love that had been building all along, hidden beneath contracts and careful distance. This was real. Later that night, after Theo had finally fallen asleep, Helena found Maximilian on the balcony of their bedroom. Their bedroom. They'd officially merged their living spaces 3 months ago, making the 4th floor into a true family suite. "That was intense," she said, joining him at the railing. "He thought I was leaving." Maximilian's voice was hollow. "He thought I would choose to walk away from him, the way his biological father did. Do you know how that feels? To realize a child you love is terrified of abandonment because of trauma you didn't cause, but will have to help him heal from? Welcome to parenthood. It's terrifying and heartbreaking, and occasionally wonderful. I want to adopt him." The words came out in a rush, like Maximilian had been holding them back for months. "Legally adopt him. Make him my son in every sense. I know it's fast, I know we haven't even been married a full year, but yes." Maximilian turned to her. "Yes? Yes. You can adopt Theo. You've been his father in every way that matters for months now. Making it legal just makes sense. Just like that. You're not going to make me wait or think, what? About it or prove myself." Helena smiled. "Max, you've been proving yourself every day since we met. Every bedtime story, every answered question, every moment of patience and love. That's proof. Theo wants you to be his dad. I want you to be his dad. So yes, just like that." Maximilian pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. "How did I get so lucky? A year ago I was a workaholic billionaire with no life outside the office. Now I have a family, a real family. How did that happen?" You fell asleep on a plane next to a desperate woman and made a very bad decision that turned out to be the best decision of your life. Correction. You fell asleep on me. Semantics. They stood together on the balcony, watching Boston's lights twinkle in the distance. In 1 week, their contract would officially expire. But the marriage, the real marriage that had grown from those expedient beginnings, was just starting. The anniversary of their wedding arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Helen awoke to find Maximilian already awake, watching her with an intensity that made her blush. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking about a year ago, about how terrified I was, how certain I was that this would be a simple business transaction. How wrong I was." "Spectacularly wrong," Helena agreed, in the best possible way. They'd planned a simple celebration. Dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first real date, followed by cake at home with Theo. But when they came downstairs, they found the entire house decorated with flowers and streamers. Mrs. Blackwell and the rest of the staff had apparently decided their anniversary deserved proper recognition. "Surprise!" Theo shouted, running to them. "Mrs. Blackwell helped me make you a present." He handed them a construction paper card covered in crayon drawings. 3 stick figures holding hands, labeled Mama, Mac's dad, and me. Above them, he'd drawn a house, the mansion, and a son. The caption read, in his careful preschool handwriting, "My family." Helena felt tears threatening again. She'd cried more in the past year than in her entire previous life. But these were good tears. Happy tears. "It's perfect," Maximilian said, his voice rough. "We'll frame it and put it in the library." They spent the morning together, playing in the garden, having an elaborate brunch that Mrs. Blackwell insisted on preparing. In the afternoon, Maximilian's lawyers arrived with paperwork, the adoption papers for Theo, and new marriage documents. No contract this time, just a simple renewal of vows that erased the business arrangement and replaced it with something real. They signed the documents in the library, Theo watching solemnly as his mother and Mac's dad made everything official. When it was done, Maximilian lifted Theo into his arms. "How does it feel to be officially a thorn?" he asked. Theo considered this seriously. "Good. But can I still be a Müller too? I don't want to lose Mama's name." "We'll hyphenate," Helena suggested. "Theo Müller Thorn. Best of both worlds." "I like it," Theo decided. "It sounds important." That evening they went to dinner, leaving Theo with Mrs. Blackwell. The restaurant was elegant but intimate, the kind of place where they could talk without shouting over music. Maximilian held Helena's hand across the table, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I've been thinking," he said. "About the money." Helena tensed. "What about it?" "The $7 million. You never actually received it. The contract expired today, which means technically I owe you that payment." "I don't want it," Helena said immediately. "That was for a business arrangement. This isn't business anymore." "I know, but I made you a promise, and I keep my promises. So I've set up a trust fund in your name. $7 million, plus whatever interest it accumulates. It's yours, to use however you want. Pay for Theo's college, start a business, travel, or just let it sit. There is security, knowing you have options if you ever need them." Helena opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. She saw what he was really offering. Not just money, but freedom. The knowledge that she was staying with him by choice, not necessity. That if things ever went wrong, she'd have the resources to rebuild her life. It was both practical and romantic, which was very much Maximilian's style. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate billionaire with questionable decision-making skills. Best-worst decision I ever made." They laughed, and the last remaining tension between them dissolved. They weren't playing roles anymore, weren't fulfilling contract obligations. They were just two people who loved each other, building a life together, one day at a time. Months passed. Winter turned to spring, and spring to summer. Theo started kindergarten. excelling in ways that made both his parents beam with pride. Helena enrolled in community college, pursuing a degree in social work. She wanted to help other single mothers avoid the desperation she'd once felt. Maximilian continued running Thorn Industries, but with more balance, more presence in his family's life. Victoria eventually softened, won over by her grandson's happiness and the undeniable evidence that Helena and Maximilian's marriage was genuine. She even apologized, in her stiff, formal way, for the trouble she'd caused. On their second anniversary, Helena discovered she was pregnant. They'd discussed having more children, but hadn't planned on it happening so soon. Maximilian's reaction was pure joy, followed immediately by panic. "I barely know what I'm doing with a 5-year-old, he said. "How am I supposed to handle a baby?" "The same way you handled everything else," Helena assured him, "by buying parenting books and overthinking every decision." "I don't overthink. Max, you spent 3 hours last week researching the optimal temperature for Theo's bedroom. Temperature is important for sleep quality," Helena laughed, pulling him close. "You're going to be a great father. You already are." The baby, a girl they named Emma Rose Thorne, was born on a snowy January morning. Theo was convinced he was the best big brother in the world, a claim neither parent disputed. Maximilian, for all his earlier panic, took to fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else in life. As Helena watched him pace the nursery at 2 a.m., gently, bouncing Emma while singing off-key lullabies, she marveled at how far they'd come. From strangers on a plane to this, a family, messy and complicated, and absolutely perfect. 3 years after that fateful red-eye flight, Helena stood in the backyard of their new house. Not a mansion this time, but a comfortable Victorian in Cambridge, with room for 2 kids and a dog they'd recently adopted. Theo was teaching Emma to throw a ball, while Maximilian supervised, ready to catch either of them if they fell. Mrs. Blackwell had come with them from the old house, now officially part of the family rather than just staff. She sat on the porch with Helena, watching the scene before them. "You know," Mrs. Blackwell said, "when Mr. Thorne first told me about his marriage plan, I thought he'd lost his mind, but I've never seen him happier than he is right now." Helena smiled. "Neither have I. You've changed him, made him human again. He'd forgotten how to be anything other than a businessman." "He changed me too. Gave me hope when I thought I'd run out. Showed me that security doesn't always mean sacrificing happiness." They watched as Emma shrieked with laughter, Theo chasing her around the yard while Maximilian pretended to be a monster. It was domestic, ordinary, the kind of scene playing out in backyards across America. But for Helena, it was everything. That night, after the kids were in bed, Helena and Maximilian sat on their porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "Do you ever think about that night on the plane?" Helena asked. "About how absolutely insane this whole thing was?" "Every day," Maximilian admitted. "I think about what might have happened if you'd said no. If you'd walked away from my crazy proposal, I'd probably still be alone in that mansion, working 80-hour weeks, convinced I was happy. And I'd still be in Montana, struggling to make ends meet, watching opportunities pass Theo by. We saved each other," Maximilian said. "Isn't that what the best love stories are about? 2 broken people finding each other and building something whole?" Helena leaned against his shoulder, the same shoulder she'd slept on that fateful night. "Are you calling our marriage a love story? I thought it was a business arrangement." "It started as a business arrangement, but it became a love story the moment you challenged me in that airport terminal. The moment you demanded $7 million instead of 5. The moment you saw past the money to the desperate man underneath. And you became my love story when you read parenting books at midnight, when you stood up to your mother for me, when you chose to be Theo's father, not because you had to, but because you wanted to." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence only possible between 2 people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Inside, they could hear Mrs. Blackwell tidying the kitchen, humming a soft tune. Upstairs, their children slept peacefully, secure. in the knowledge that they were loved. "I need to tell you something," Maximilian said. "Something I should have told you years ago." Helena's heart skipped. "What?" "That morning in City Hall, when you were reading the contract and I was standing there terrified you'd say no. I realized something. I was offering you a business arrangement, but I was hoping for something more. Even then, even when we were strangers, part of me knew you were different, special, the woman I'd been waiting for. Without knowing I was waiting. Max, let me finish. I told you I chose you because you had no connections to my world, no ulterior motives. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I chose you because when I woke you up on that plane, the first thing you did was apologize for inconveniencing me. You were exhausted and stressed and dealing with your mother's terminal illness, but your first instinct was to worry about bothering a stranger. That kind of innate kindness is rare. I saw it, and I wanted it in my life. I needed it." Helena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm glad you were desperate and terrible at decision-making that night." "Me too." Maximilian kissed her forehead. "Best worst decision I ever made." Inside the house, Emma started crying, probably waking from a bad dream. Helena moved to get up, but Maximilian stopped her. "I'll get her. You stay here and enjoy the quiet." She watched him go. This man who'd been a stranger 3 years ago and was now the center of her world. She thought about her mother, about that conversation in the hospital where Elizabeth had insisted Maximilian loved her even if he didn't know it yet. Her mother had been right, as mothers often are. 10 minutes later, Maximilian returned with Emma on his hip, her face tear-stained but smiling. "She wanted to see the fireflies," he explained. They sat together on the porch swing, Emma between them, pointing excitedly at the insects dancing in the darkness. Theo appeared in the doorway, clutching his stuffed elephant, unable to sleep when he heard his sister awake. "Can I watch the fireflies too?" he asked. "Of course," Helena said, pulling him onto her lap. So they sat there, the 4 of them squeezed onto a porch swing that was really only meant for 2 people. It was crowded and slightly uncomfortable, but neither Helena nor Maximilian would have changed a thing. "This is nice," Theo said sleepily. "I like our family." "Me too, buddy," Maximilian said. "Me too." Emma yawned, and Helena felt her own exhaustion catching up with her. It had been a long day, as most days with young children were, but it had been a good day. They were all good days now, even the hard ones, because they were living them together. As they sat there in the gathering darkness, watching fireflies and listening to their children's soft breathing, Helena remembered that moment on the plane when she'd made the decision to accept Maximilian's proposal. She'd been so afraid, so certain she was making a mistake. But sometimes the scariest decisions led to the most beautiful destinations. "Thank you," she whispered to Maximilian. "For what?" "For being crazy enough to propose to a stranger. For being brave enough to love us. For choosing to be the man you are instead of the man you were supposed to be." Maximilian kissed her, soft and sweet, mindful of their audience. "Thank you for saying yes. For taking a chance on me. For showing me what family really means." Emma had fallen asleep against Helena's shoulder, and Theo wasn't far behind. Maximilian carefully lifted Emma while Helena carried Theo inside. They put the kids to bed, tucked them in with practiced efficiency, and stood together in the hallway between their children's rooms. 5 years ago," Helena said quietly, "I was boarding a plane thinking my life was over. My mother was dying. I had no money, no prospects, no hope. If someone had told me that falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder would lead to this," she gestured around their home, "I would never have believed them. 5 years ago, I was boarding that same plane thinking I knew exactly what my life was supposed to be. Make money, build empires, stay emotionally detached from everyone and everything. Then you drooled on my shoulder and ruined all my plans." "I did not drool." "You absolutely drooled. It's in the contract somewhere, I'm sure." Helena laughed, then grew serious. Do you really think we would have found each other? If not for your grandfather's will. If circumstances hadn't forced us together. Maximilian considered this. I'd like to think so. Maybe not on that plane, maybe not in that moment, but eventually. Because some connections are inevitable. Some people are meant to meet, regardless of the circumstances. That's very romantic for someone who claims to be emotionally stunted. I've been reading books on expressing feelings. Turns out communication is important in relationships. Who knew? They retired to their bedroom, the master suite they'd designed together when they bought this house. It was smaller than Maximilian's room in the Boston mansion, but it was theirs, filled with photos and memories, and the detritus of everyday family life. As they got ready for bed, Helena caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different than she had 5 years ago. Older, yes, but also more settled, more content. The constant worry that had lined her face was gone, replaced by laugh lines, and the kind of peace that comes from security. She thought about the contract, about how they'd tried to reduce marriage to a series of obligations and financial incentives. It seemed laughable now, the idea that they could have lived together for a year without falling in love. They'd been fighting a losing battle from the start, two damaged people who needed each other more than either wanted to admit. I love you, she said, turning to Maximilian. Not because of a contract or an arrangement, or financial security. Just because. Because you're you, and I'm me, and somehow we work. Maximilian pulled her close. I love you too. Even though you still occasionally fall asleep on my shoulder during movies, and yes, you still drool a little. Once. That happened once. Twice. There was that time at the theater. Helena kissed him to shut him up, and any further discussion of drooling was forgotten. The years continued to pass, each one building on the last. Theo grew into a bright, confident boy who excelled at school and inherited his mother's kind heart and his father's strategic mind. Emma was a force of nature from the start, fearless and funny, and completely certain of her place in the world. They had struggles, of course. No marriage is perfect, even ones that start with multi-million-dollar contracts. They fought about parenting decisions, about work-life balance, about whose turn it was to handle the middle-of-the-night crying baby. But they fought fair, and they always came back to the same foundation. They'd chosen each other, and they kept choosing each other every day. Victoria eventually became a doting grandmother, her edges softened by age and the undeniable evidence of her son's happiness. She and Helena developed a cautious friendship, built on mutual respect and their shared love for Maximilian and the children. On their 10th anniversary, Maximilian took Helena back to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. They walked through the terminal, past the gate where they'd first spoken, to the exact seats where they'd sat during that fateful boarding process. 10 years ago, Maximilian said, I sat here contemplating the end of my life as I knew it. I thought I was sacrificing everything. My freedom, my privacy, my perfectly ordered existence. I had no idea I was actually about to begin living. Helena looked at the gate, remembering her own desperation that night. I sat here thinking I'd failed at life. Failed as a mother, as a daughter, as a person. I had no idea I was about to meet the man who would show me I'd never failed at all. I'd just been preparing for the life I was meant to live. Should we renew our vows? Maximilian asked. Make it official again. Helena laughed. We've renewed our vows 3 times already. I think we're sufficiently married. I just like any excuse to tell a room full of people how much I love you. You're getting sentimental in your old age. I'm 45. That's not old. It is, when you're chasing 2 kids around a backyard. They stood at the gate, passengers flowing around them, everyone heading to their own destinations and destinies. Helena wondered how many of them would have life-changing encounters on their flights. How many would meet strangers who would become family? How many would look back 10 years from now and see their lives as clearly divided into before and after? Do you ever regret it? Maximilian asked quietly. The unconventional way we started? The fact that our love story begins with a business transaction? Helena thought about this. In a world of traditional courtship and romantic gestures, their origin story was decidedly unromantic. No candlelit dinners or long courtship, just a desperate billionaire and an exhausted single mother making a mutually beneficial deal. But that deal had led to everything else. To Theo's adoption, to Emma's birth, to a decade of learning to be partners and parents and people. It had led to this moment, standing in an airport on their anniversary, looking back at how far they'd come. "I don't regret a single moment," Helena said. "Not the contract, not the rushed wedding, not even your mother's initial hostility. Because all of it led us here, to this life we've built together. Even the drooling incident. Especially the drooling incident." She kissed him, right there in the middle of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, while travelers streamed past them. "That drooling incident changed my life." They flew back to Boston that evening, back to their home and their children and their beautifully ordinary life. Mrs. Blackwell had prepared a special anniversary dinner, and the kids had made cards with construction paper and glitter. After dinner, after the kids were in bed, after the house had settled into nighttime quiet, Helena found the original contract in Maximilian's study. They'd kept it as a memento, this document that had started everything. She read through it again, smiling. At the clinical language, the carefully enumerated obligations, the attempt to reduce marriage to a series of checkboxes and financial incentives. "Looking at our origin story?" Maximilian asked, joining her. "Just marveling at how naive we were. We really thought we could do this without getting emotionally involved. To be fair, we did try. We lasted almost 3 months before we admitted we were falling for each other. 3 months is nothing. It felt like forever at the time. Every dinner where we made awkward small talk, every time I stopped myself from reaching for your hand, every night I went to bed alone knowing you were just down the hall. It was torture." Helena turned to face him. "You were thinking about me? During those first few months? Every minute of every day. I'd be in board meetings thinking about whether you'd laughed at breakfast. I'd be reviewing contracts and wondering if you were comfortable in the house. I'd lie awake at night listening for your footsteps, hoping you might come knock on my door. I was doing the same thing, fighting what I was feeling because I'd promised myself I wouldn't get emotionally involved. But you made it impossible. The way you were with Theo, the small kindnesses you'd show me, the way you'd actually listen when I talked. I didn't stand a chance." Maximilian took the contract from her hands and walked to the fireplace. "I think it's time we finally destroyed this thing. Let it go up in flames, symbolic of moving past our business arrangement into something real. That's very dramatic. I'm a dramatic person. You should know this by now." He tossed the contract into the fire, and they watched as the pages caught and burned, the words disappearing into ash and smoke. It felt ceremonial, final, the last vestige of their transactional beginning consumed by flames. "There," Maximilian said. "Now we're not bound by contract, just by choice." "We've always been bound by choice," Helena said. "The contract was just paper. The real commitment was what we built together despite it." They stood together in front of the fire, watching the last fragments of the contract turn to ash. It felt right, this ending. Not an ending to their marriage, but to the complicated beginning that had made everything possible. 10 years, 2 children, 1 dog, countless arguments, compromises, laughter-filled nights, and early morning chaos. They'd built a life from impossible circumstances, turning a business arrangement into a love story for the ages. As they headed upstairs to bed, Helena paused on the landing. "Max, do you think we would have been happy with anyone else, if circumstances had been different?" Maximilian considered this seriously. "Maybe. But I don't think I would have been as happy. You challenge me, push me to be better. See past the billionaire to the man underneath. Not many people do that. And you gave me security. But more than that, you gave me partnership. Someone to share the burden with. Someone who chose not just me, but my son. who loved him like your own before you had any legal obligation to. I didn't choose Theo out of obligation. I chose him because he came with you, and you were a package deal. Best package deal I ever made. They reached their bedroom, this space they'd shared for 10 years. Helena looked around at the evidence of their life together. Family photos on the dresser, Maximilian's reading glasses next to her night cream, a stack of parenting books on his nightstand right next to her social work textbooks. We did pretty well, she said. For two people who started with a fake marriage, we did incredibly well. For any two people, fake start or not. That night, Helena dreamed of the plane ride. But in the dream, when she woke up with her head on Maximilian's shoulder, instead of apologizing, she smiled. And he smiled back. And everything that came after, the rushed proposal, the City Hall wedding, the year of adjustment, happened in fast forward until she woke up in this bed, in this life, with this man beside her. She woke to find Maximilian already awake, watching her with that same intensity he'd had on their first anniversary. "What?" she asked, slightly self-conscious. "Just thinking about how lucky I am. How a desperate middle-of-the-night decision turned into the best thing that ever happened to me." "Best worst decision," Helena corrected. "Best decision," Maximilian insisted. "No worst about it. Asking you to marry me was the smartest thing I've ever done. Even though I drooled on your shoulder. Especially because of that. The drool was a sign. A sign of what? That you trusted me, even in sleep. That on some subconscious level you knew I was safe. That we were meant for this." Helena laughed, but warmly. "You're reading a lot into a little drool. I'm a romantic. Sue me." They lay in bed as dawn broke over Boston, painting their room in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere, down the hall, they heard stirring. One of the kids waking up, ready to start another day. Soon the house would be chaos. Breakfast to make, lunches to pack, the daily scramble to get everyone where they needed to be. But for now, for this moment, it was just them. The girl who fell asleep on a stranger's shoulder, and the man who decided to build a life with her. It shouldn't have worked. By all logical reasoning, their marriage should have been a disaster. But logic didn't account for connection, for chemistry, for the way two broken people could heal each other. "Hey, Max," Helena said softly. "Yeah. Thank you for being weird enough to propose to a sleeping stranger on a plane, and for being stubborn enough to make it work when all logical sense said we should fail. Thank you for saying yes, and for being brave enough to take a chance on me when you had every reason to run away." They heard footsteps in the hall. Emma, from the sound of it, heading to Theo's room to wake him up so they could plan whatever mischief they had in store for the day. "Should we get up?" Helena asked. "Probably. The chaos waits for no one." But they stayed in bed for 5 more minutes, holding each other, secure in the knowledge that whatever the day brought, they'd face it together. Not because a contract obligated them to, but because they'd chosen each other. Every day for 10 years, they'd made that choice, and they'd keep making it for the rest of their lives. And it all started because a tired woman fell asleep on a desperate man's shoulder on a red-eye flight to Boston. Sometimes, the best love stories begin in the strangest ways. Sometimes a business arrangement becomes a beautiful marriage. Sometimes drooling on a stranger leads to happily ever after.